What is a bad design? Is it a design that someone doesn't resonate with? Is it a design that has an odd pairing of colors? What is an ugly design? Is it a design that leaves you feeling repulsed or disgusted? A design that doesn't fit into someone's stated romantic interests or aesthetic tastes? A design that simply doesn't work or falls short in terms of what it wanted to convey? In this somewhat different video of my series of tips and tricks, I'll give you some clarification of terms, a breakdown of what constitutes a good design, and a slightly deeper dive into some of the caveats of the industry as of late. And if I do sound any different from my usual self, I am kind of sick and it seems to only be going after my lungs and my voice, so I apologize for that.
I'm calling it a brain. I'm pretty sure it's where ideas come from.
Dad, I don't have a brain.
Not everyone uses these terms like this. Please keep that in mind, but I'll make some clarifications so no one gets confused throughout the rest of the video, because I've noticed a lot of the time on the internet, the main thing that leads to a lot of confusion and anger is when people don't clarify their understandings of a concept, so I'm just kind of laying the groundwork here. Attractive. Stereotypically and systematically rated as more sexually attractive as a person, or if there were a real one, if they're a fictional character, when compared to others. Typically viewed from a straight perspective, and at a certain point, it's very much beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Granted, a lot of this happens within the confines of a specific show or game. Sometimes some styles will establish patterns between the sexes, and sometimes those patterns are broken with some characters and how they are represented or proportioned, and will likely be seen as less stereotypically attractive when compared to others in the cast. So I need us all to be adults here and admit cases like Moira from Overwatch breaking some of the established patterns that the other female characters have, and is therefore seen as less stereotypically attractive from a general audience's perspective. Some of the proportions of her face especially are quite different than basically every other woman in the cast of the game, meaning the general population would rate her as less generally attractive. But her design is still great, and the appeal and power fantasy are very much there and properly conveyed. Appealing or appeal. The character's power fantasy, playstyle, personality, and elements of story correctly conveyed through their design. This has to do more with the function of the character and the physical aspects that make them up. Which design is more appealing is dependent on who's viewing it. For example, who's to say Rocky Road is a better ice cream flavor than mint chocolate chip? Another example, personally, I wouldn't choose characters like Scarlet Witch or Mercy if I booted up their respective games, but that doesn't mean their designs are bad, they just don't appeal to me, and that's okay. But sometimes a character's specific appeal doesn't attract a wide audience. A character's design. The final product of the character found in their respective media and all that accompanies them, such as voice acting, sound design, silhouette, body language, and animation. This is what more of my channel has been going over compared to some others. Concept art. The art made by the concept artists, that exists to capture and sell other people on the idea of a potential new character or idea. Typically a lot more trial and error in this stage. It's very iterative. It's mostly throwing stuff at a wall and seeing what sticks. Sometimes it's dependent on how fun a playstyle is in testing, and then art is made to represent that potential character. It can even be as basic as a simple drawing or a bunch of notes on a napkin. For example, Hellboy was a quick sketch that was iterated on over time by Mike Mignola, and soon got a life of his own over the years, getting his own comic series and movie adaptations. Then when concept art teams finalize a design, the artists move on to making model or reference sheets, which exist for the modeling and texture teams to use as a base for physical models and the textures of the character, or as reference sheets for 2D animation teams, so they can keep track of all the details and proportions. Sometimes concept art is also used to refer to things like mood boards or storyboards, but typically, before anything's finalized in any sort of production, concept art is made of that thing. So do keep that in mind. But concept art is not always the same as a model sheet, but typically it's the step before it. Concept art and character design is the conveying of visual information through the design of a character, essentially judging a book by its cover, which leads us to the golden rule of character design. The golden rule and what makes a bad design. The golden rule of character design is that the design should successfully convey the idea of the character's inferred personality, gameplay, and story aspects visually, while also being functional at the same time. The whole point of a character's design is to get your audience to subconsciously infer things, even if they're not familiar with the medium or all the little tricks and details that go into making a character. It also helps greatly if the design has many elements to distinguish them from the rest of the cast, such as color palettes, shape language, unique lines of motion, and vastly different silhouettes. A variety of sizes and shapes also greatly helps with adding intrigue with a character's design. One of the biggest pitfalls that you should avoid when designing a character is making them look boring. Specific characters will be designed differently depending on how they're animated, especially in hero shooters. When a character moves specific limbs around a lot, since they're a part of their kit or playstyle, typically focus is put onto it. Usually, you need to focus the majority of the limb so the audience doesn't get lost when tracking the different parts of the body. Look at both Sombra and Tracer from Overwatch. Tracer keeps her arms steady when she runs around, while Sombra lets her arms move through a full range of motion with her run cycle. When you look at them, you'll notice that Tracer has a focus on the entirety of her legs, but only the ends of her arms, while Sombra has the entirety of her arms and legs focused on. Hypothetically, if only the ends of their legs or feet were emphasized, the audience would have a hard time tracking the movement of the limb, since it's such a small focal point. So it's basically a really small character covering a great amount of distance with a lot of motion, and that is very confusing to see. Compare the focuses on those characters' legs to Ramatra's feet, because they're actually one of his focuses. Ram's run cycle takes longer to get through, as well as he travels slower, so people won't have as hard of a time tracking where his feet are when he moves around, because the spacing of his feet on your screen is far smaller and the timing is a bit longer. Some characters will borrow aspects from others to help unify them. This has to do more with the story aspect of the characters, as you likely have to unify characters that belong to the same faction, for instance. But in regards to things like hero shooters, if designs or silhouettes become too similar, you start to lose distinguishing aspects between characters, meaning there is the possibility of the design being actually bad. As someone in my comments kind of brought up, a good character for a hero shooter should look like they could be the protagonist of their own story, instead of being a side character in someone else's. A bad design is when it fails to meet the criteria of unifying those three main aspects in any major way. Just because a character or a design is not universally sexually attractive doesn't make it unappealing. There is also the issue of a positive correlation between someone being seen as approachable as more attractive. But sometimes that more hostile look is what the character was designed to elicit. And what that means is that there's nothing physically wrong with them, but they don't immediately come off as approachable or as friendly as someone else. Sometimes some characters are designed with resting bitch face, like I've talked about a couple times. Take Cillian Murphy, for example. Sometimes when he relaxes his face, he doesn't always look that friendly. But I'd still say he's a pretty attractive man. A bad design can happen in a couple of different ways. There's no proper focus on the character. No specific part of the character is really emphasized on their design, and if there is emphasis, it's on a part of them that doesn't really make any sense. Or what's being elicited or invoked doesn't really match the character in any regard. For example, if they're associated with a specific color, but that color has nothing to do with their personality or playstyle. Or another thing is, like if the focus is drawn to a part of them that doesn't really make any sense. There's no established shape or body language being employed by the character to elicit any sort of emotion from the viewer. This happens when shapes and lines of motion are seemingly random and scattered. As to where the energy flows on the character and where the focus ends up doesn't really make any sense. Again, it gives the viewer the issue of, why am I looking at that thing, and if I am immediately drawn to it, why doesn't this make any sense? It's just kind of boring. The palette isn't really interesting, and it's kind of desaturated or dull. The shapes don't elicit anything grand, the lines of motion don't dynamically point you at anything. Granted, this is done to lots of background or side characters because you don't want them to be memorable all the time. Then it's warranted. Or it can be an inconsistent portrayal of the character. For example, the writing of a character during a cinematic or specific instance of them doesn't match up with the pre-established patterns of their behavior. Or it can be a more simple mismatch, of giving a very warm and vibrant palette that comes off as a bit more extroverted to a character that's written as cold, closed off, and introverted. Unless that juxtaposition or switch up is what you were trying to do with the design. For example, pretty privilege is very much a real thing, and a character like Prince Charming can't exist without it. Granted, there's probably a bunch more examples I'm missing, but I'm sure you guys get the point as to what can make a bad or commonly referred to as an ugly design.
Wait for official instruction. Wait my ass.
Kill all sons of bitches. That's my official instructions.
Now that you guys know what leads to a unsuccessful or bad design, we can now go into how the layman tackled the idea. That's not meant to sound derogatory, just how the general public interact with characters' designs. Since a character's design is very much a visual language, the word ugly is used in typically synonymous ways to bad or unsuccessful. Since characters are usually designed to look like humans, when something goes wrong or isn't working correctly from a design sense, the average person will pick up on it subconsciously but lack the words to articulate it, and they usually end up saying the design is bad or the character is ugly. You need to figure out what they're getting at rather than simply dismissing their opinion. As they say, everyone is a critic. It's like when people who don't know music theory listen to a melody that's functionally incorrect. They don't have the words for it, but they usually say it's bad and they can tell something's not working right. Many times, characters are put into settings and scenarios where it benefits them looking gritty and ugly from a common understanding of the word. It also does make sense for some characters to look quite weathered and worn. Some characters are going through some pretty difficult stuff, or they're sleep deprived, or they're even being mind controlled. So it makes perfect sense for them to look quite haggard. Most of the cast of Warhammer Darktide look like they tried to make out with the bottom of a lawnmower, but that's okay because it helps fit them in their setting. Sometimes people will call a good design cool, which typically a great design is cool. A great design is cool and has a phenomenal appeal factor. But you need to distinguish if they're referring to the character as a personal favorite, or the person is familiar with character design, and that the person understands that the design succeeds from the appeal sense. Sometimes the word ugly is used on characters that don't look friendly or they don't look stereotypically sexually attractive. Sometimes that's actually the intent, like I've mentioned before. So we end up with a successful character design with the proper ideas being expressed and the design is succeeding in terms of appeal, but being traditionally sexually attractive wasn't one of the things that the design set out to do. But sometimes an entire production can have the goal of creating a cast of characters that are not seen as typically sexually attractive, subverting traditional beauty standards as it's typically referred to. But characters being referred to as ugly sometimes has to do with the Uncanny Valley. The Uncanny Valley is the idea that the closer something humanoid looks to a real-life human, the less amount of things an artist can get wrong in terms of replicating a human in digital form. Typically, the Uncanny Valley has this point in between stylization and reality that a studio or artist needs to overcome, or else a character may come off as eerie or uncanny, like a wrong-looking human. Many studios keep their characters looking stylized, so they can get away with foregoing certain anatomical aspects of a character, while others try to achieve a realistic look with their artwork, settings, and characters, sometimes missing the mark. This is part of the reason why I think people don't like the way Resident Evil 7 Chris looked. Capcom was still new to getting people to look really good on the RE engine, and if you look at the rest of the cast of the game, they all look ill and sickly. So they could get away with the characters looking a bit uncanny, so some of the ill look transferred over to Chris because of it. And that's why I think they refer to him as ugly sometimes, because the real face model is actually quite far from that. If you look at the facial structure of the model, they have actually followed the pre-established pattern of facial features that every other version of him had. Although the width of his shoulders and the size of his neck may have changed in this game, leading to a difference in appearance that way. You'll notice sometimes that if studios choose to scan in faces of real-life people, sometimes the geometry or topology is correct in terms of measurements and proportions, but the texturing and animation doesn't quite meet the same standard. Once a character looks realistic enough, studios have to get things like the way our skin folds, as well as how our pores move when our skin stretches and compacts in on itself, working in a correct way, or else things start to look kind of uncanny. Some studios also choose to either represent or leave out things like subsurface scattering with their characters. What that term refers to is the occurrence of a bit of light passing through the edges of an object, which light does do with our skin, but especially our cartilage. It's not always used, but sometimes when subsurface scattering is either left out or done wrong on a realistic looking character, it can look off and people may say ugly. In order to represent a realistic looking character, it does need to be done right. Again, subsurface scattering can be left out for stylistic reasons. The other thing is that a lot of older games were still quite a ways away from looking realistic, so we kind of forgave the characters for looking a bit odd or uncanny, as the studios likely didn't have the technology or know-how on how to achieve an accurate looking human face at the time, or the consoles just simply couldn't do it. As well as, the older games had to deal with more hardware limitations, and in many cases, limitations breed creative stylization, so the characters still looked good, but just not realistic. This take of realism and the Uncanny Valley actually leads me to my next point.
So? What did they tell you?
I don't speak Japanese.
Over about the past decade, it's been noted that the Eastern and Western video game industries have tackled the designs of their characters differently, and if they do cross into realistic directions, keeping characters stereotypically attractive, while the West chose to go in a different direction in many cases, kind of ending up with a quadruple whammy. This portion of the industry decided to go for realistic directions, while including less represented ethnic groups, while trying to challenge beauty standards, and with a different staff turnover structure. In some cases, not all though. I don't know if you knew this, but lots of games in the West have been made by studios who make use of a lot of contract work, leading to a lot of newer staff not knowing how to work lots of the tools or how to keep the projects optimized. There's also the issue of outdated engines, technical debt, and spaghetti code, but that's a whole other topic. This is how we end up with games like Assassin's Creed Shadows having over 2 hours of credits, most of those credits belonging to contracted overseas workers. Or we get instances like Halo Infinite. That's a whole other can of worms though. The important thing to note is that these studios went in the direction of realism lots of the time, while not fully achieving that goal, leading to almost every character looking uncanny in some way, not just the female characters, which a lot of people focus on and tend to ignore that the male characters look equally as weird. The thing is, making characters look and move like real humans is an incredibly difficult task. If something as simple as the way the light interacts with the skin isn't done right, now their faces look off. If the lip sync isn't well done, now their faces move weird. And since lots of Western projects use quite a lot of motion capture, it means that like 9 times out of 10, the faces are actually hand animated. I'm sure some of you have seen the behind the scenes footage of what motion capture looks like, but the cameras over the actors' faces are actually only there for reference most of the time. So sometimes they are animated without it, and it can look really odd because nothing really moves the way it should.
This is curious.
Nero.
There's even times when they forget to animate the faces altogether.
The sequence is extremely close to the parasitic weapons used by the Los Illuminados cult.
You think Arius might be one of them?
The process of characters looking uncanny is usually a death by 1,000 cuts. And the staff turnover definitely doesn't help, because the constantly rotating employees never get enough time to get their sea legs, so to speak. Then there's also games using library-based motion capture with adaptive facial animation, which we see a lot of RPGs use. The characters' bodies usually choose from a variety of preset animations for dialogue scenes, while the faces are handled by a bunch of scripts. So if you don't get the faces to move right in this way, they can look off. It's like comparing Mass Effect Andromeda to Cyberpunk 2077. One was able to get it down way better than the other.
Reed or Songbird? What would you do in my shoes, Johnny?
I am in your shoes, dumbass.
Sometimes motion capture is also used in productions that have their characters quite stylized in terms of looks and proportions, so the movements look realistic but the mechanics of them don't match the models. Depending on a character's proportions, their body mechanics will vary wildly. BT from Titanfall 2 in many cinematic moments uses motion capture, because the Vanguard class chassis has similar limb lengths as well as a similar center of gravity compared to a normal human man, so they can more easily get away with using motion capture. Roadhog and General Grievous, when hunched, are close in height, but they move completely differently as the way they keep their balance is nothing close to similar. Even their center of gravity is completely different. Granted, both characters are hand animated rather than motion capture, so they look fine, but sometimes productions use motion capture on models that likely should have used hand animation. Take the productions of the Polar Express or Monster House, for example. Some people refer to those movies as looking kind of ugly.
All right, kids, this better be good. I was in the forest wrestling with a bear claw when we got the call.
Another thing that I should mention is that since they also wanted to include so many different ethnic groups, it also increased the difficulty in getting the faces to look right, as different ethnic groups have different skin types that move, fold, and absorb light differently, as well as different bone structures that you have to represent for people's faces. Historically, people with sub-Saharan skin types were quite difficult to get right in CG animation, as their skin handles light in very specific ways. It took quite a while to get it right, but the industry was very happy when they did get it right, at least in pre-rendered cinematics. Sometimes, though, some studios land on a specific art style with the production, and it just looks kind of odd. People may also refer to things like this as ugly, like with the animated Lara Croft show. There's nothing technically wrong with the animation. I've seen productions with less keyframes and more limited budgets, but the style makes everything look kind of off. I can't even put my finger on exactly what makes it look so weird, but it doesn't sit right with me. I don't really recommend the show unless you want to hear Richard Armitage speak Mandarin or Cantonese at some points. That's really the only redeeming factor about the show. It's not that great.
Did you climb on me?
A bit.
Comparatively, the East was not challenging beauty standards and for the most part underwent less staff turnover. They also seemed to not try and include such a wide swath of ethnicities, leading to them getting really good at representing a few specific ones. But even some Eastern developers, like Kojima, mentioned that Eastern Asians have unique qualities to their skin too. So he avoided including them in any major roles before he thought the Decima engine could handle it. So they both chose more stylized looks for their current projects, leading to less instances of an uncanny look to their casts, and they also chose to represent a smaller number of ethnicities while not challenging beauty standards, leading to them getting better at that before branching out to others.
You wanna see crazy?
No, I've seen that movie, and spoiler alert, it ends with a closet full of my suits on fire!
I wish you'd been wearing one!
Who would want to wear an on-fire suit?
Cosplay enthusiasts!
What?
Wait,
Do you
no,
even hear
shit.
how totally batshit insane you sound?
I'll tell you what I hear!
I know some people bring up some of the newer roster of Overwatch and call them ugly or bad. I think it may stem from them not knowing what to look at, and I can see why. For example, Hazard and Sojourn. Unlike some of the other characters in the roster, some of their focus is on their backs, like with Hazard's spikes and Sojourn's boosters. Meaning, in order to understand the clarity and the purpose of the design, they need to turn around. which we do see Hazard do in his select animation, and I think they were trying to get around this problem by doing that. Unfortunately for Sojourn, one of her focuses is her gun, which she doesn't have in either her select animation or her hero gallery pose. And that leaves the focus on the white of her, and it makes the viewer wonder, why am I looking there? Because there's really nothing to see there. Compared to Mei, who both has a focus on her back, but the entirety of her jacket is also the focus. So a good focus is still on her from the front, you know, to look at her big heavy winter coat, which still helps convey her player fantasy. Going back to Sojourn, nothing is really gained from looking at the white on her, but when she's with her gun, the focus is really made evident. It's this big artificial and mechanical railgun. Granted, both Hazard and Sojourn have a pet peeve of mine that is summed up with the phrase, "What the hell are you wearing?" Also, their cybernetic bodies confuse me quite a bit, but that is a whole other thing on its own. My pet peeve is when a character is outfitted in clothing that doesn't really convey what it should because of how much has been sacrificed, typically for sexual attraction. Usually done to female characters rather than male ones. Also, I do think Freya and Emre could have been pushed a bit further to make their designs a bit more interesting while also conveying their characters a bit better. Whenever I hear what the character is supposed to represent and then I look at what they look like, they just need like a little boost, a little shove. That's all they need, just in the right direction. Because I think they're at like the same equal amount of, it's like, they could be better though, you know? I'm fully aware though, that especially in the East with the way manga is adapted, it boils down to the fact that the author and the illustrators behind their works likely just enjoy drawing really hot women, and, you know, I can't really blame them for that. There's the whole example with FromSoft and the design of Guinevere in Dark Souls, which if I'm to believe the story behind the design that I read online, it's actually kind of funny. Then as these things get adapted into shows or movies, certain shots or scenes now have to be acted and animated, so they usually feel like they last a bit longer because it's no longer a simple matter of flipping the page when you feel like it. You can still make a character attractive and appealing at the same time. I'm not saying I want ugly characters, far from it. I like awesome, cool, sexy characters that successfully convey all that they need to do, right? I'm not saying I want to make a bunch of uggos, okay? I would like designs to follow established trends with their respective media, and sometimes some characters I think need more pockets. Take Revi, for example. Her shorts are so short that you should be able to see the pocket square hanging down from the jean shorts, but you can't see them, which means likely she doesn't have any functional pockets, besides her holsters, and she seems like the type of character that would love pockets. This is also part of the reason why I love robotic and cybernetic characters, as it usually means that the entirety of the character's body can be changed, for the sake of what you're trying to convey. Nothing is off the table, and you don't even need to worry about the shoes anymore, too. Even the feet can be fully designed. Granted, mechanical characters are typically quite a bit harder for studios to work with, so they're typically not a priority for including them in a roster. So you gotta keep that in mind. Rigging teams typically don't like working with pistons. It's just how it works. In conclusion, a bad design is a design that doesn't properly elicit what it should from the viewer, leaving the viewer to feel confused. A bad design is when a character doesn't have the proper interesting appeal factor and is left a bit boring. Sometimes designs try to replicate reality without accurately replicating every aspect of what makes us look human, leaving the viewers referring to a cast as ugly. Granted, the terms bad and ugly are used interchangeably amongst most people not well versed in this side of the industry. It's important that you know what constitutes a good design and why some characters may be referred to as bad or ugly, and how to address that. With that, I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, feel free to send them in the comments. And after all this, take care.